Well, I think that you need to look at the reality of what's happening on the ground. I think the Spanish authorities this morning were trying to do what they felt was a good thing by having a motorcycle lane which separated vehicles from motorcycles. That didn't work so well, not least because they were also implementing ad hoc scanning of some identity documents, even of their own nationals, of Spanish nationals. They were scanning ID cards of Spanish nationals. And therefore, I mean, what we're seeing here I don't think is purely political, but you won't persuade any Gibraltarian, let alone me, that there isn't a political strand to what we are seeing. I've heard what Senor Alvarez had to say yesterday, and in fact I had given my interview to the Chronicle before I read what Senor Alvarez had said, and maintained that I think we all want the same outcome. We want a treaty that works for all of us, that gets rid of the problems that we're seeing with the frontier, etc. But that good faith has to be demonstrated on the ground, and Gibraltar has not set up any new controls. We have only reciprocated the controls that we have seen being carried out on our own citizens. I think we can all take a step back and ensure that this continues to operate as well as it has in the context of Brexit as we go forward to try and finish these negotiations.
These incidents take no one by surprise. Gibraltar's always had its ups and downs when it comes to relations with Spain, but they certainly put the spotlight on the vulnerability. We've had, as you said, Senor Alvarez, the Spanish Foreign Minister, saying these incidents where Gibraltar has exercised jurisdiction over its waters go against the constructive spirit behind the negotiations.
Well, I think you need to divorce all of these incidents, and you don't need to see them all as being one issue or one cause. I mean, Gibraltar, whilst it's led by a GSLP Liberal administration, is never going to cede on any issue which relates to sovereignty. That includes waters. And at the table, in the negotiations, we have not ceded on waters. We won't cede on waters.
But when you don't cede, you have the frontier.
Well, but there's the very clear issue here. Is it that Spain and Senor Alvarez expects us to cede in the context of a negotiation? They haven't said that in the context of the negotiation, and indeed in all his public statements, Senor Alvarez has talked about sovereignty not being on the table. I mean, I'm reminded of the former Chief Minister, Sir Peter Caruana, saying, although they said that they didn't want to talk about sovereignty, they wanted to talk about waters, and they wanted to pretend that the waters were theirs. Well, look, it's not going to happen under a GSLP Liberal administration that we're going to somehow forego our right to enforce our nature protection laws on the water when our law enforcement authorities decide that they should. That's not going to happen. We're going to ensure that we are as careful in the enforcement of our laws in the sea as we are careful in exercising our right to jurisdiction on people coming into Gibraltar through the land frontier, the airport or the port. Now, the negotiation is complex. Our good faith is there. I am sure that Senor Alvarez was not saying that because we have exercised jurisdiction on the water, because our law enforcement agents have felt it's appropriate to do so, that there is a frontier queue, because that link has not been made by Spain as far as I know, unless that's what you think Senor Alvarez was saying. I did not read it that way. If it was to be read that way, look, I have a very clear message for Senor Alvarez and for anybody else. Our waters are our waters. The United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea makes it very clear. The reservation that Spain has filed does not have the force of law. In international law, those waters are British Gibraltar territorial waters. There was an excellent article in one of the local newspapers in the region recently by a Spanish lawyer confirming that the idea of a dry coast is a legal nonsense in public international law. I mean, I feel like sending that to every Spanish politician I know, in particular the mayor of Algeciras. Prepare to find new ways of dealing with things like immigration and how you do them in a way that provides a compromise that delivers a solution that is not a concession. But there's no question whatsoever of us having a constructive spirit that somehow trammels over our sovereignty rights. And I don't think that that's the way that we have managed this process so successfully in the past 2.5 years since this negotiation began, or 2 years since this negotiation began, and the 2.5 years before that when we were dealing with the withdrawal process. And it's not going to be my attitude going forward. If anybody wants a surrender monkey for a chief minister, they better not choose me at the next election.
Well, today we've seen reciprocity at the frontier. It must have been a difficult decision to make, because on the one hand, if you do nothing, it's only the Gibraltarians who are prejudiced, But if you do introduce reciprocity, you are holding back Spanish workers. Isn't this slightly cutting off your nose to spite your face?
Well, look, of course, the government said we've done this reluctantly, we do it with a heavy heart, because we want the maximum flow that we can have. But it's not difficult to make a decision of principle, because once you have established a principle, to move to that, when your opponent moves to that, and I'm sorry to use the word opponent, but I don't think it's appropriate to refer to the Spanish authorities that have made these decisions as anything other than opponents. It's a very simple principle. In the matter of immigration, you behave with reciprocity. So apart from the physical issue that we're dealing with, which is the issue of the motorbikes, which might work well. I mean, in the same way as we have our loop, which provides a queue for motorbikes and doesn't require motorbikes to go with vehicles. If the Spanish authorities want to establish something for motorbikes so that they don't interfere with vehicle movements, that's fine. But the idea that you start to scan documents, which is unnecessary, which creates a queue, that you start to divide flows as EU and non-EU and require Gibraltarians to go into the non-EU queue, which of course we are non-EU, in a way that creates more delay for Gibraltarians because they might be caught up behind busloads of tourists, etc. That is problematic because it really does require us to act in the same way. And so in the same way as Spain has its very clear criteria, EU, non-EU, we have a very clear criteria. UK, non-UK. Because we're all UK nationals, whether we're Gibraltarian or other British, we're all UK nationals. And so today we've started doing the scanning of identity documents as well on an ad hoc basis, and we've started to begin the separation of flows so that we have UK and non-UK queues. So on the Spanish side, if you're a EU national, you'll be able to go on that queue. When you cross into Gibraltar, if you're an EU national, unless you have dual nationality, you'll have to go into the non-UK queue. And if you are British, on the Spanish side, you'll have to go into the third country national lane. And when you come into Gibraltar, you'll go into the UK lane. Now, obviously, one lane will move faster in one jurisdiction and the other will move faster in the other jurisdiction. That's reciprocity. That's what we have to do. I'm afraid that there is no way out of that principle other than, as I hope we will manage to do, to either stand down back to the interim position we were holding before, or to finalize this treaty negotiation and have the fluidity that we all hope and we all continue to say is what we think is best for all people in the region and can lead to greater prosperity for Gibraltar and greater prosperity for the region. To use this phrase that we've been using now for far too long, the shared prosperity that we're trying to achieve.
Chief Minister, it feels like there's a deterioration with relations with Spain. What sort of contact are you having with your Spanish counterparts, and were you forewarned of any of the changes at the frontier?
You have to understand that Spain is in an interim situation at the moment with a caretaker government with very sensitive negotiations for the investiture of a prime minister. And as people will know, your viewers will know, Alberto Núñez Feijóo has been asked by the King to attempt an investiture on the 26th or 27th of September. That does not appear to be an investiture that will prosper. It is likely that there will be another attempt by Pedro Sánchez for an investiture after that. Otherwise, Spain will have a general election again. The parties are not just looking at what happens in an investiture, they're looking at what happens in another general election, so they're getting a little bit prepared for that general election, burnishing their credentials for that general election.
Is that the same for Gibraltar?
I don't think I have to burnish my credentials on this issue for sure. But it is certainly true that because of that situation in Spain, our contact with Spanish colleagues is perhaps not as fluid as it had been before. We are still in contact. We were able to head off some of these issues a week and a half ago. Some of the work that we've done seems to have been undone by some of the agents that want to undo the good relations. That just leads to a potential deterioration. You've described it as a deterioration. I would just like to describe it as a potential deterioration. I hope that we will be able to see common sense prevail, that we will be able to get through the investiture period in Spain to a new Spanish government, potentially with a new Gibraltar government as well, of whatever political complexion the people of Gibraltar decide. I hope they will, of course, decide to vote for the party that I will be leading into the next general election, and then into the negotiation, which I hope will finally settle this matter in a way that will be A, historic, B, beneficial, and C, of course, mostly my main concern in the interest of the people of Gibraltar and the residents of Gibraltar and those who come to Gibraltar to work every day.